instead of these.
Oh, no, you can use those too.
Yeah, I was just using different colors. That's fine. Actually, yeah, this black one wasn't quite as good, so I'll use that as the black one. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, as long as it's not the permanent one, that's right.
The big thing is when you're not writing, put the cover back on.
Yeah.
Because when people just sit high, put the cover off, it
Yep.
dries out.
Yep. Gotcha. Yes. Oh yeah, yeah. This is fine. Yeah, it's with the pictures that the internet pictures that I can't live stream. This one's fine. Yeah. All right, are we ready to go back there with? That's right. All right, try again. There we go. Can you hear me? All right, good. Microphone's working. All right, so the subject for this afternoon is a little different than what I've done here before. Whenever I speak, I normally do it with PowerPoint and various different things that I've put together on screen. And this presentation is so brand new that I've only done it once so far, and that was out at PUC at the Angwin Village Church. You're familiar with that as a place we always go to and do our first presentations of the year. And I've done it there, and so I'm in the process of developing it into a full regular program, but it's not there yet, so it's not polished at this point. So it's a little bit more just making it as we go. The whiteboard will serve in place of the screen with everything printed out. And also, we're going to go back to the way my dad first was giving his sermons back in 1985, when everything he did was on a chalkboard or a whiteboard, and there were no visual aids of any kind, no charts, no PowerPoints, no whatever. All of his stuff was done in this way, so I'm hearkening back to that era of his presentations. All right, so we're going to talk about a very important but tricky subject. It's important because it affects all of us. It's tricky because everybody already has prejudices one way or another that get involved with this and become a thing that gets people's hackles up as soon as you start talking about anything in our current world today. And so I've got a few things to say first before I actually start this presentation, some kind of roadmap of where I'm going with this. To start with, this is entirely a historical presentation. This is not something that's predictive, speculative, what's going to happen in the future, where we're going to go in America, where we're going to go in the world. This is not an idea of that sort of presentation. This is a historical presentation of how we got to where we are right now. And so this right now is what happened yesterday and is what is happening today, but not about what is happening tomorrow. So that's for one thing for sure I wanted to be very clear about. I'm not going to start guessing about what the future will hold. That's not my role. So that's the first kind of premise of what we're talking about here tonight. The second premise of what I'm talking about here is this is not a political sermon in the sense of we're going to look at a bunch of bad guys that we need to replace with good guys. This is not about that, because we're not dealing with something where I'm grandstanding in the pulpit in favor of anybody in place of anybody. This is not about a political rally sermon, and this is not about promoting any group in opposition to another group, because every group is full of bad actors, every group is full of problems, and we're not trying to say if you can just get rid of the bad apples, you'll get a perfect government that runs things properly. That's not how our society works. It's full of bad things that Satan got his tendrils into everywhere, and so this is not about pushing one side or the other. This is focusing on a certain area. And because of the way that what the topic involves, it will end up being focused in a certain direction against many of the right-leaning forces in our society that we have gotten to up till now. And that's where people's hackles get up, because if they have any sympathy toward the right-leaning forces, then I'm the enemy for attacking their friends. And that becomes where it becomes very tricky. And again, that's not my purpose here, because if I did a presentation on secular humanism and how it is a threat to us, that would have a completely different set of actors, a completely different set of bad guys, if you will, and it would lead in a different direction and focus on that. And that is completely a valid thing to talk about as well. But here's what I've noticed, and this is kind of an important reason of why I'm presenting this. There are many Adventists who are presenting the dangers of secular humanism in the world, in our society, and in Adventism. And that's something that has been done exhaustively, maybe too much. And that's something that has been something thoroughly hashed out in many, many different presentations. I don't see a lot of presentations dealing with the Christian nationalism threat to our society and to ourselves as Adventists. And that's why I'm focusing on this, not because they're the only bad guys, but because they're kind of an ignored bad guy in many circles right now in Adventism, and that's why I'm going to look at this in this presentation now. So this is, again, not picking sides, but addressing a specific topic that in many ways gets under-addressed in our society and in our Adventist culture. So that's kind of the second premise of what I'm talking about as well. And then the third premise is I will be naming names in this presentation. I will be getting specific of the historical actors who have led us to this point, both very old and very new. Some of them you will have never heard of in your life. Others, you will know them the moment I say them, and you will know everything about them because they're extremely prominent. And so again, this is going to be covering all sorts of different people because of their role in this kind of progress. And again, my point, and this is something I really stress, it's not about bad guy focus, because there's a lot of ministries out there which are focused on the bad guys. Look at what the Pope is doing. Look what his Jesuit lieutenants are doing. Look at what the elites in Europe are doing. Look at what the communist focused people are doing. You know, there's all sorts of bad guys out there that we tend to focus on with a lot of our presentations. And we don't like that focus because it focuses us away from God onto the villains. And that's not really what we should be focusing on. And so when I present this, I'm not trying to get everybody riled up against the bad guys, and if we can just squash out the bad guys, everything will be fine. This is just about understanding our place in history and understanding where we are, and if we can understand that, have a better idea as things happen, why they are happening. And so again, this is not in design for you to now focus on everything you talk about and focus on everywhere you go looking at these bad guys. This is just a focus on this issue to kind of give us a historical premise of where we are now. So those are kind of my premises of what we're talking about in this program. And so again, I'm not trying to make enemies with this. People hear what I have to say on this and they don't like it because I've stepped on one of their heroes or whatever. I'm not trying to do that. There are many, many people with many, many issues, and we have to look at where their background is coming from. So what we're going to be talking about here is a history of Christian nationalism in America. And I'm going to just start with the very first Christian nationalists, long before the term was ever invented. And I'm not going to spend much time on them because they are so obvious and so old at this point that we're not going to spend a lot of time. But 5 minutes after people got to America, Christian nationalism was a thing. The Pilgrims. The Pilgrims were the first Christian nationalists because they set up a state church. They set up a set of rules that you had to follow to be part of the society. If you did not follow the rules that they set up, you would be punished. You would be fined. You would be put in the stocks. You would be, various different things were done to you. Very few people know that there was a death decree in Pilgrim society. If you violated the Sabbath and were convicted 3 times, you could be subject to a death decree. You could be killed. And I don't know if it was ever enforced. I don't know the details of that. I know that it was on the books in Massachusetts in the early part of the Pilgrim history. They had a death sentence for Sabbath breaking. And it was, of course, Sunday. And so that was the first Sunday law in America before it was America, before we had a nation. And so that's something that, again, we kind of tend to forget how serious they were about holiness under their form of government and their form of religion. And so that didn't last for 2 reasons. There was a real true spirit of religious liberty that took hold in early pre-America, and it was led by Roger Williams. He left the Pilgrims, he escaped from their, their form of society, and he founded his own in Rhode Island. And he became the first American religious liberty advocate here, where everybody could believe what they wanted, even if you believed nothing. If you were an Indian, you could believe in your whatever. If you were a Quaker, you could believe in whatever. Each person could believe whatever in his colony. And guess what? When the founding fathers, Madison, Jefferson, Hamilton, the real thinking giants of the early American experiment, started to put together their idea of what America would be, they went with the Roger Williams model rather than the Massachusetts Puritan model. That's very significant. They deliberately chose a religious freedom point of view with a First Amendment that gave everybody the right to believe whatever they want, and that was something that was very strong amongst them. And they put up a separation between church and state that the Pilgrims did not want. And so this was a rejection of the Puritan model, and it was in fact a very deliberate church-state separation model that we had in America from day one as part of our original Constitution and Bill of Rights. So that was the original version of Christian nationalism that really started this off, but that's not really what we're going to be looking at, because we're going to go now to the time period that really started the beginning of this, and that is the 1890s time period. Guess what? Just what we were talking about. And it's the National Reform Association. And its nickname was the NRA. Now, this has absolutely no connection to our current NRA whatsoever. And so this right here was formed in the generally 1885 to 1895 time period is when this group was really active. And this was a group that had a very strong perspective on what mattered in America. Christianity needed to dominate. It needed to be in charge of the government. It needed to make the decisions. It could no longer have the atheistic, non-Christian, whatever version of society taking place. And so this was a very powerful group at the time of various churches that worked together to become a political force in America at that time. And it had a bunch of supporters in the government at that time, the first of which is a guy named Blair. And there were others, but he's the one that is really the one that was remembered, because he got his name attached to a bunch of bills, Blair bills, that were being pushed through Congress to achieve some sort of a Christian nation type of ruling, especially Sunday law type rulings. So they were pushing for Sunday laws. And that was what he became known for, and the Blair Acts and the Blair bills that he was pushing was basically to force a day of worship Sunday upon America as a way of reforming them. When you read the language of the National Reform Association, when you read the ideology of what they were pushing, you find almost exactly the same words used today 150 years later. It's almost amazing how much they have taken from this original Reform Association movement. And so they had several bills that died in committee, and guess what? One of the people who helped kill those was A.T. Jones. He went to the Congress and he actually spoke out against these various bills, and he told how terrible they were, and the congressmen listened. They killed them in committee, they didn't advance them, and the bills were actually squashed pretty easily on several levels, except for one. One of them made it through and was actually passed. It was for the 1893, I think it was 1893, World's Fair that was taking place in Chicago. It was one of the biggest events that had happened up until that point, and the bill said that no vendor could have their booth open, selling, doing business on Sunday. And so that was passed. That succeeded. And so they said, no, you can't do anything on Sunday. Now, this was a huge fair that took place over 6 months, and it was a huge money-making endeavor. And to kill its revenue on one of the most important days of the week, Sunday on the weekend, was unacceptable to all the merchants who were involved in this. And they said, we're not going to obey that law. We have no interest in closing down for one day a week. And so they ignored the law. They defied it. And so then that was the big thing. The churches were not, they are defying the law. We must enforce it. And so they were wanting penalties against these merchants for ignoring this law of the land. And at the same time, A.T. Jones got together a huge petition list against this act, and he brought it to Congress, and he said, this is worthless, this is terrible, we should not do this. And the Congress again listened, and they basically refused to enforce the law. And so the law on the books stated that they had to keep Sunday sacred, and they did not, and there was no punishment. And that was extremely frustrating for the various Christians which had gotten this bill passed, and they had been successful in pushing something through, and it didn't last. And so that was a big blow to the early National Reform Association, and they never really achieved anything beyond that. That was kind of their high water mark. Now the interesting thing is this: when was this taking place? Exactly at the time of everything that my dad's been talking about here today, the 1888 through 1893 time period. That's when this group was coalescing Christian groups, and even Catholicism was starting to get involved with it at that point. And there were some Catholics who kind of ignored it, but others were saying, yes, this is a good thing. And so there was a merging of these various groups to form this National Association of Christians working together for a Sunday law type legislation. At the same time that A.T. Jones and Waggoner and Ellen White are giving this closing message of righteousness by faith that would end our existence on this planet if God's people had said yes to it. And this was ready to go. And so we were actually closer to a Sunday law then than we have ever been since in America. And there has been no reasonable attempt to enforce a Sunday law or to push a Sunday law until very recently. And that we will get to as we go. But it is very important to say that this was the beginning and is the father of everything that we see today in what is going on in Christian nationalism. And so that is now kind of died out. It died off not because it was an unsuccessful group, but it died out because God's people said no. They said no to the 1888 message. They pretended that that wasn't important, and God had to let them go back into the wilderness, and because of that, this went away as well. Because this can only happen when God's people are actually ready. This will not happen on its own, and that's a key lesson of everything we're going to look at today. There will never be a national Sunday law if there's not God's people ready to go through this final trial. If we're here another 1,000 years with God's people not being ready, there will not be a successful attempt to pass a national Sunday law. Cause and effect. The cause is God's people being ready. The effect is a national Sunday law. That is a crucial point of everything I'm talking about here. So now we come to our time. Now we get to a very interesting development. So this group was made up of a bunch of various denominations, mostly the kind of conservative ones in America, churches of the time. And they kind of got disgusted with this process. They kind of decided, you know what, we tried the politics, we tried the laws, we're just going to go away and work on ourselves for a while. And so they kind of went into an isolationist mode for the 1900s. And so they kind of stopped getting involved in national politics for quite a long time, and they developed over the time into what we now know as the conservative evangelical churches of America. These are all your Baptists and your various Presbyterians and all these different denominations. It's not focused on any one denomination. There's pretty much a very wide range of denominations. Some of them are a little bit more on the fringe areas and some of them more mainstream, but they're all basically conservative evangelical type churches which grew out of that original group. And they started developing a lot of institutions. They developed a lot of homeschooling programs. They developed a lot of teaching facilities and colleges and all sorts of different things like that. And they focused on retreat centers. And it was a very insular thing. Teach each other the ways of their Christianity and not get too much involved in worldly issues. That kind of lasted until the 1950s. At that point, they started to emerge from this shell which they had gone into. And there was a kind of a reapproachment between them and national politics and the ways things were going. And at that point, they became, now this is even before, I'm going to put the name up here first because this is kind of one of the names that you will know that started this process in our current times. Billy Graham. He was a Protestant preacher that did fantastic work in just preaching the gospel and reaching people in huge stadiums and getting the truth of Jesus' overcoming sin to people. But it was an evangelical gospel. It wasn't the complete biblical gospel of overcoming sin. It was just being forgiven within your sins type of gospel. But that was him, and he saved many people's souls because of what he taught them and they accepted. So I'm not denigrating anything here. It's just this is what he was. He was doing great work in reaching people out there in his speaking tour, but he was also doing something else as well. He became involved with the power politic people, the presidents, the congressmen. He was involved with them. And so during the time of Nixon and during the time of the one that followed Nixon, what's what? Yeah, Ford, that's right. During Ford and Nixon and Eisenhower era, that he was very much involved with every administration, on both sides, on Democrat and Republican. He was involved on both sides. And he would meet with them and talk about how important all these issues were and stuff like that. And so he began this process of getting really involved with the political power structure of the times. And at that point, like I said, he was going with both sides. It wasn't really a Democrat or Republican thing. He was really just trying to reach the leadership and get them to be on board with a Christian agenda. And at that point, you know, it was kind of innocuous in some ways. He kind of pushed a pro-America, anti-communism rhetoric, which is what at the time was very much a thing of the time. He was very much against the evil communist empires over there in Russia and, you know, in the Cold War era. And so, you know, he was also a pro-business, pro-American industry type of person, you know, where all of that was great. And so that was kind of his involvement at the height of his powers. During this process, the evangelical movement decided, you know what, we need to start going back out and changing things for the better because America is getting way too secular. It's getting way too much into new, at the time, not even the term, new age type of hippie type of things where it's just completely rejecting of formal Christianity, and that has to change. So we're going to go out there and re-engage with society. And a group of these guys started to do so in the 1970s. That's when our real modern version of this starts to kick in. In the 1970s, they get together and they say, we need to have a national movement that will be pushing a Christian agenda in our society. And so they first came up with a name which they said was going to be a great name, and it was called the Christian Coalition. That was the first name they gave to it. It eventually started to morph a little bit into a new name that became another name for the same thing, the Moral Majority. So those two were kind of early possible names that they were working on as kind of their group. And so there was a bunch of different people, and I'm not going to go into everybody that was involved in this. It's, you know, quite complicated. I'm trying to keep this as simple as possible. But some of the big names, some of the ones you will recognize from that time period, are groups like, are names like Pat Robertson. And he eventually would go on to become the head of what is called the 700 Club, which was a very widespreadly influential group, TV, radio, all that kind of stuff. That was a big, big name in that. And the other person involved in this was the very flamboyant Jerry Falwell. Okay, and so that was another big name of the time. And these two went on to national prominence. They ran for presidents at times. They got into scandals. They had a whole history of stuff going on like that. But those two were the kind of the Christian voices for this. Now, at the same time, there was others that were developing along this in the political world who were also on the same page with this. And one of the most prominent of the time would be the very famous Governor of California and eventually President of the United States, Ronald Reagan. he worked with them. It was a group effort. This was not something that he just tacked his wagon onto, this kind of thing. This was a concerted effort where they met together, talked it over. What can we do to advance each other? What can we do to advance your political career? What can I do to help your Christian values? This was a partnership. This was a group that was totally online with each other. And so he succeeded in getting made president in 1980, and he lasted for 8 years. Now, this 1970 was the formation of this group, basically the Christian Coalition Moral Majority. And it had various different twists and turns of its development and its ideology and what it was promoting. And, we could talk about all of that, but that's not, super important right now. And so it really kind of solidified in the 1980s once Reagan was elected, and he began to push a very specific set of things that were part of this agenda in a Christian America type format. And he became the one to actually reapproach the Vatican and bring them to the White House in the first time in many, in American history, basically, and set up a partnership with whatever the Pope of the time was. And so there was all these different things. He also was extremely influential in setting the stage for stacking the Supreme Court with people of your ideology. That was one of his key things. You pick the people on the Supreme Court which will advance the Christian agenda. And so he started picking people like Scalia and various different people that were the ones who were pushing that sort of thing as part of their agenda as well. And so the pushing of Christian values in our government, the pushing of kind of an ecumenical joining of all denominations. That was another key thing of all of this. It's not just evangelicals, but let's work with the Protestants, all different denominations. Let's work with the Catholics. Let's work together for common issue goals. And so they work together in a new way where they're no longer enemies on every last doctrine. We're going to set aside doctrinal differences. And Ellen White predicted that a century in advance, where she said that was going to happen, and it really started to happen in this time period. So now we get to the 90s. Now Reagan is no longer there. He's off the scene at this point. And Bush Sr. has not really followed up with what Reagan did. He's kind of a little bit more indifferent to these types of issues and is not the person they would like the same way Ronald Reagan was. And so a new push starts to be made now in Congress to really push this agenda as a Christian ideology. And again, it's not called Christian nationalism at the time. That name hadn't been invented yet. This is just a bunch of Christians who are working toward political goals. The person who became important at that time in the mid-1990s was a congressman named Newt Gingrich. Now, that's about 1995. He becomes extremely powerful. He is a Christian, evangelical, who is in Congress, and he is pushing an agenda which is very pro-Christian on every level. All the different things that the Moral Majority Christian Coalition have decided are their issues, he's the one pushing that, and they get what is called this had been called the Reagan Revolution when he was elected president. And now Newt Gingrich was kind of the second wave of that when he started in 1990s to take over Congress and start to push all of these kind of Christian values in our society of where we're going in as a Christian nation. It's about this time that the names of these two start to fade away, and it gets replaced by a new term that becomes what we know it as now, the religious right. This is kind of what they settle on as their kind of movement goal as a name for the entire group. And Pat Robertson is still part of that. Jerry Falwell is that until he dies. They're very much pushing that group. They get extraordinary success in many local and national elections. They get a lot of their candidates voted into office using these tactics. And so they push various things. Another person at the time in the religious world who becomes prominent at this time is the Ralph Reed, who was the head at the time of Focus on the Family. You're right. You're right. That's correct. Ralph, you're absolutely right. Ralph Reed was right after this, so I skipped one ahead. James Dobson was focused on the family, and Ralph Reed was one of the other prominent ones of this time that was a little bit different, but in that same group. Okay, so now this became an extremely influential group, Focus on the Family, because this was all about family values and about raising your kids right and being a good parent and all the different things that really appealed to many, many Christians. Even outside the political arena, this was extremely successful. And mixed with all of the really positive things in this Focus on the Family was this undercurrent of we need to throw out the separation of church and state. We need to focus on establishing a government which is passing laws that are in favor of Christian values. And so this became a very much a Trojan horse organization that appealed to people because of its pro-Christianity family values. And it was infused with a lot of things which were very much against what our government in America had stood for on religious liberty for 200 years at this point. And so now, at this point, we're now into the late 90s, and by 2000, their next person that they were sure was going to be their guy gets elected into the presidency, and that is Bush Jr. Now, he was a much better candidate for them than his father was. His father really wasn't into what they were into. Bush Jr. was. And so he became their candidate that got elected in 2000 and was in the presidency for 8 years. And they were sure he was going to be their guy to make things happen. And it didn't work out as well as they thought, but it was there. He did push a lot of different things. He pushed a lot of the school funding issues that they've been wanting, where the government monies go to private schools, and that was a big push of Bush Jr. And they pushed a lot of, Christian values through him and whatnot. He never went as far as they were hoping. They never went as far as they were, pushing him to do. He always was a little bit hesitant, and he didn't go as far as they liked. Now, this is the basic religious right picture of where we are right now, leading through up into the 2000s. They had had enormous success, especially in local races, but they had had some success in the national races, but not as much as they wanted. And they kind of started to fizzle a little bit at this point, where they were not as successful as they used to be. And they started to put in new candidates after that for president, and they would fail, and they would fail, and they would fail. They kept failing. And so their political momentum seemed to have peaked and started to go downhill at that point. And so what is interesting now is this group never went away. This group is still there. I mean, all of these guys who are still alive, a lot of these guys, early guys are not, but a lot of the ones who are part of this have continued to work in an effort to become a government force in America and to elect the right kind of people. But now something new starts to develop in parallel to this group over here. This group over here is mostly made up of mainstream evangelical churches. The ones you've mostly heard of are these types of groups. And so these are the ones who are kind of when my dad talks about the evangelical gospel, this is the hardcore people who are promoting that gospel. This group is basically what infected Adventism in the 1950s. This is the group that changed our doctrines into a false version of Christianity, where you are a sinner by birth, and Christ is nothing like us, and you will never overcome sin completely. All of those are the teachings of this group that have come into Adventism. And so the theology of this group is very dangerous, and because it teaches you that you can be saved in your sins as long as you say, God save me, forgive me, and then he declares you righteous, exactly what he was talking about at church service this morning. That is what we are talking about with the theology of this group. So it's not just their politics which are dangerous, but their theology is also dangerous. But then a new group starts to develop in parallel to this, which is not the same group at all. These are the mainstreamers here. These over here are not mainstream. We are now going to be looking at the fringes of Christianity, the fringes of conservative evangelical Christianity. We're talking about the ones who are out there who are usually non-denominational or very specific, small denominationals. These are the ones who are going out and doing a lot of different things that you will have heard of, and I'm just going to put this in kind of brackets of kind of what these groups entail. We're talking about the tongue speakers. We're talking about the faith healers. We're talking about the charismatic, the ones who get messages from God, who receive prophecies. We're talking about the ones who are prosperity preachers, that the only point of Christianity is that you can become rich and wealthy. All of these kind of ones that are kind of considered the hucksters, the weird people of the Protestant world are in this group. And so these are not mainstream. They're doing their own thing. They're not really denominational. They have, scattered or big mega churches where the entire church is their own unit and it's not connected to anybody else at all. All of these types of group out there are pretty much looked down on by this group. These are the stalwarts. These are the real Christians. These are the weirdos, comparatively. And some of these even get the designation of cult category from the cult callers over here. And so this is a group over here which is not very well regarded by mainstream Christianity. And so it's an interesting thing that how this develops. They're just kind of doing their own thing. They've been kind of developing their own ideology while this group has been working on politics. This group has been working on ideology. And the one who really got this going is a person you probably have never heard of. And so we're going to, this is the key person in this group, and his name is Peter Wagner. And I'm going to underline that to emphasize his importance to this whole process. Peter Wagner came out of this group, and he went over here and started looking at these groups, and he got excited. He got fascinated. He thought this was cool. There was power here. There was energy. There was excitement. He decided that he was going to focus on this group rather than the stolid, old-fashioned, conservative, mainstream evangelicals. And so he started working with some other people, such as, and this became kind of a partnership, so I'm going to put her on the same level, Cindy Jacobs. And she is a prophet. She was one of the many prophets of the time that were now starting to spring up and become prominent because they were many prophecies depicting what was going to happen next. Now, there's a key part of this entire thing. I'm putting this as part of this because this is a key aspect of this. The use of prophecy as part of the religious experience. They are getting messages that they say are from God. Now, the key part of that is it a message from God? Obviously, you have a criteria of whether or not something is a message from God. This is how we decide on Ellen White. This is how we decide on Jeremiah. This is how we decide on Paul. How can you tell if it's a true prophet of God? The criteria of prophecy is if it is in favor with everything that has been revealed before, it does not contradict any revealed light that has come before, and if what is being said is an uplifting thing that is leading you toward God or away from it. So those are very important criteria to decide if something is coming from God or not. Now, it's interesting about the prophets that are speaking in this group. This group over here is anti-prophet. That is important to understand, and I'm even going to put that on this here as a important aspect of their ideology. They do not like prophets, and they call groups that have prophets cults. And that is one of the reasons that they came to us in the 1950s and said, you're a cult because you have Ellen White as a prophet, therefore the end, you're just like the Mormons, you're just like Mary Baker Eddy and all these weirdos, if you have a prophet, you're a cult. And so this is an anti-prophet group, this is a pro-prophet group. And that is one of the key distinctions between the two. So the prophets that come to them tell them that you're doing pretty good, the world stinks, and we need to fix it. That's the majority of what the prophecies they get really revolve around. It's not about cleaning up your life. It's not about becoming right with God. Have you ever heard a true prophet give a message like that? Did Jeremiah tell everybody, you're going the right direction, just keep going and let's fix the system? Did you have anybody say that about Elijah? Just keep going with what you're doing, it's all good. These prophets tell people, you're in the right track. It's the world and the society we're in which is on the right track. Let's fix it. This is how we fix it. And we've even heard, there's a Messianic Jew that I listened to a few years ago, this is like 6 years ago now, that he spoke to a national audience in Washington, D.C., and said, the fact that you are here in this auditorium listening to me shows that you are on God's side. You are just giving the true message that we need to hear, and you're here and you're a part of that. And those people over there in Washington, D.C. are the enemy, and we need to stop them. That was basically what he told them as his messages from the Lord. And when God says to turn around, he applies that to the society. The secular society needs to turn around. God's people, the religious people, are doing just fine. That is what these prophets are basically giving a message of, and that is not a sign of true prophecy. And so that is a key part of all of this. And so she's a prophet, and she works with Peter Wagner, and he's the theology guy. He's the idea guy. He starts to invent names. He starts to figure out ideas, and he's eventually the one who will call this new group by its official name, which is the New Apostolic Reformation. And guess what? That's N-A-R, not N-R-A, N-A-R. Don't get them mixed up. And so that becomes the official name of his movement, which again is made up of many, many different groups, and just like this is made up of many, many different groups. But the overall umbrella that becomes the name for all of that is the New Apostolic Reformation. Now at this point he starts to get a lot of support, a lot of followers. It begins a really powerful movement. This is about 2010. And so now they're really starting to pick up a lot of steam. They start to pick up some very prominent people that become very important to this new movement. One of the strangest names of all is Dutch Sheets. That is a very prominent guy who again is a quasi-prophet in all of this. Another one who is also in the same thing is Lance, and I gotta make sure I spell it right, Wallnau. Lance, make sure that's, yeah, okay. Lance Wallnau. Now he, again, that's another prophet. Let's just put prophet there. These are self-proclaimed prophet that have been accepted by the group as speaking in God's name. So those guys are now disseminating the teachings of Peter Wagner. And so especially with these two at the top. And they're going out and they're starting to hold rallies and they're starting to preach to big groups and they're starting to give the messages of God to these various different things. And so at this point now, they start to put up candidates for office and follow the same model that this group has been doing. This group is not getting so much success as they used to. And this one of the people they start to promote is a woman that was from Alaska. That is a name of Sarah Palin. And she becomes a vice presidential candidate of the time. And she was apprenticed up in Alaska to one of these NAR prophets that was one of her teachers up in Alaska. And so she was completely connected with this group, and that's why they supported her and started pushing her. And so this was the first time that anybody that they started to push became anybody prominent in the same way that some of these names had been prominent over the time that they had been pushing various different things like that. Her candidacy failed. She was unsuccessful, and so she disappeared after that and hasn't come back since. Another one of the people who start to jump on board this bandwagon at this point, who is a prominent name, is a Christian minister that is one of the kind of quasi-prosperity preachers in Southern California with a huge mega church, Kenneth Copeland. And so he decides that this is the bandwagon he wants to attach himself to, and so he goes with this group and starts putting a lot of money into this. His church is a huge source of income, and he starts putting that into this group enormously and pushing their various things. Now, this starts to develop in the mid-2010s, the teens, and so they're kind of getting some traction now, where this group is starting to lose traction, this group is starting to gain traction. Now, some of the key things with this group I've said up here as in this sort of thing, but another thing I'm going to point out that separates these two groups is a completely different ideology of end-time events. And I'm just going to include this on both to make sure we can see these differences taking place. So I'm going to put that as here's the anti-prophets. And so this group over here has now totally become pro-Israel. This is a huge facet of this group because they are dispensationalists. This group is all about the dispensations of each era is a little different, and all the prophecies of the Old Testament have to be fulfilled before God can come. And that means Israel has to be restored to greatness. It means the temple has to be rebuilt. It means sacrifices have to be restored. When all of that happens, at that point, the surrounding nations, the Arabs, will attack Israel, and what is known as Armageddon, and that will be the end of earth events that will then lead to the second coming of Christ. All of that is a sequence that has to take place. And so pro-Israel is all about getting to Armageddon so that we can have the final events and get off this situation and move to the next millennial stage. And they're usually having the millennia on earth. Some are different, they vary on that, so I'm not going to put that as a thing for everybody, but most of them say the millennia of Jesus will come and we'll have a millennia of peace on earth before anything else happens. That's generally this group. But the pro-Israel part is crucial, and that's why for the last 40 years you've been hearing all politicians and religious right leaders praising Israel, telling we need to defend Israel. You get commercials on TV about saving the poor Israel who's starving to death. All these different things are because this group has this thing that wants Israel to do what it needs to do. And here's the cynical part. I'm not going to throw this out at everybody, but a lot of this is very cynical because they don't really care about the Jewish people. They just want to get to the Armageddon stage when the Jewish people will be destroyed, and then we can get to the second coming. And so they're not really so much concerned with the Jews as much as they are with getting to Armageddon and getting this finished. And so the pro-Israel rhetoric is enormously powerful from Newt Gingrich time period on, that everything has to be pro-Israel. Now with this group, now you're not having that. Israel is not important for a very specific reason. It's either neutral or anti-Israel. And so the reason for that is because this group has decided we're not waiting for Israel to get their act together. We've been waiting forever. They're never going to get their act together. This is taking too long. We're going to change the prophecies relating to Jerusalem to America. America is the city on the shining hill. America is the one that will fulfill the prophecies of God. America is where everything must happen. We're not going to wait for Israel. We're going to get it done here in America. We're going to focus our efforts on changing American society, and once we do that, then Jesus can come. So it's no longer us waiting for Israel, it's us actively changing the government in America. And this is when this becomes Christian nationalism. The Christian nationalism movement starts to get that name in the mid-2010 through 2020, because at this point, America needs to be Christians nationally. It needs to be run by Christians. It needs to be made up of Christians. And anybody who isn't Christians will be second-class citizens. Everybody who isn't Christians will need to leave or be put into line. This becomes a very aggressive Christian-only movement, that everything must work through Christianity. Now, this was kind of favorable to that, but this is aggressively for that. And so this is where the Christian nationalism of our modern era really takes hold with this second group. And so that's why I bring this up as opposed to this, because these are very much less aggressive on that than this group. This group is fanatical about it. And they began to use the term Christian dominionism. Christian will dominate everybody else. And Christian nationalism is kind of the term for that has become the popular term. And so now we're getting into the mid-2015 area, and so now the next step of this process happens. A very significant event happens that changes everything moving forward. And so now we're going to bring into this the political figure of, you guessed it, Donald Trump. He shows up in 2015. And so at this point, two significant things have happened. Number one of these prophets in about the year 2011 gave a prophecy saying that Donald Trump would be the president of the United States that would change everything for Christianity in America. 4 to 5 years before he ever really runs for president in this time period. He had been running for president for many years. He'd been running as a Democrat. He'd been running as various things before he switched parties. And so at this point, he had never had any traction whatsoever. He'd never gotten anywhere with his attempts to be president. And so years before his successful attempt, a prophecy is made that was called the Commander-in-Chief Prophecy. And it said that he would become the president and he would change the Supreme Court and he would make everything the way that the Christians needed it to be. And so that was the point where he steps into the really successful arena in which he is now. And so why was he successful? And this is always the question everybody asks. Because he's not religious. He's been, married twice, and he was always pro-abortion before he became a Republican. He was all the things that these groups can't stand. And so all of a sudden, he's the one supported by them. How did that happen? Well, he had a pastor that was a very significant person in this at this point, and her name was Paula White. And she was his local pastor down in Florida. And she was part of this group. And so he started to talk to her, and she started to talk to her friends, and she began to make network connections with all the other people in this power structure that was now developing. And so Paula White became the key that unlocked his access to this group. And so she started to go around and tell everybody this is great, and she eventually convinced Cindy Jacobs that this was important and you needed to focus on this. And so she got involved. Now by this point he's getting very old. He's starting to, to the point where he's almost dead at this point, so he's not as relevant. She becomes very important. Lance Wallnau meets with Donald Trump in this time period, and then in that meeting, very famous meeting, he puts his hands on Donald Trump and tells his prophecy that he gives as a prophet that he will be the next president of the United States, and he will be the Cyrus of history in modern times. Now, Cyrus was the key figure of the ancient, after Babylon empire that was holding on to the Jews, and he was the one that paid for and helped them to reestablish themselves back in Israel. And so Cyrus had been predicted by God long before he was born that he would be the person that, through Isaiah, I think it was Isaiah 45, that he would be Cyrus would be the one who would save the Jews from their captivity. And so Cyrus has a very strong secular base that he helps the religious people of the time. And so Lance Wallnau says Donald Trump is the Isaiah 45 prophecy, which means he will be the 45th president of the United States. It was marketing gold. You had a religious prophecy tying into a political act, and it became this fantastic union that told everybody it doesn't matter if he's secular. Cyrus was secular. It doesn't matter if he's religious at all. He can be as secular as he wants to be, but he will do the job God asked us to do. And so that's why he all of a sudden becomes accepted by this group of people. He is not accepted by this group of people. He is totally rejected by this group over here. This group of evangelicals say he is totally not acceptable under any circumstances. And they, at that point, were putting up other people as their candidates. They hadn't really decided on anybody at that point, but color. They kind of were focusing in this same time period on Ted Cruz. There were a couple other candidates. They were kind of leaning toward Ted Cruz at that point. He was their favorite option of the available choices, even though he wasn't, he wasn't loved in this group. But he was like, okay, best we can do type of kind of person. And so, but they were backing anybody instead of him at this point, in the early stages of his presidency. And so this group then, all of a sudden, starts getting momentum. They start promoting him. They start sending out contacts and papers and saying, this is the guy we need to have. And this group all of a sudden changed the dynamic of the presidential primaries at that moment. After this prophecy that Lance Wallnau made, after the extreme efforts of promotion that Cindy Jacobs was making and Paula White, all of a sudden they got enough of the evangelicals from this group on board with this, especially with the prophecies that had been coming out. The Commander-in-Chief prophecy was extremely influential in this process. And they convinced enough of this group to back him over any potential candidate from over here. And so he got the nomination. He got the Republican nomination of the time. And at that point, then he had no chance. He's not going to make it. He's blown up his candidacy with scandals and things like that. There's no possible way he's going to win. And then he wins. It was a miracle of God, according to them. That's the way they trumpeted it as. It was the miracle of God that God had got him into this candidacy and got him the presidency. And there was, against all odds, Donald Trump was the new president. Now at this point, he becomes their guy, and he does whatever they want. He's pushing all of their agendas. He's pushing all of their ideologies. Whether he agrees with it or not, he's supporting them because they're supporting him. It's mutually agreeable. It's a deal. It's just like Ronald Reagan made the deal with these guys in the early days. I will do whatever you want. You do whatever I want. We'll be great. It'll be fantastic. And that's the bargain that is made between him and this group. And so he, lasts for 4 years. He gets unelected in 2020, despite all the prophets saying he wouldn't. They said for sure he wasn't going to lose. And then, of course, he loses. And then at that point, January 6th and everything that happened with that, all of that goes on at this point. All of these guys are defending him throughout this process, even after he's out of office. They do not give up on him. That is a key point. They didn't just go on to the next guy. They continued to say that was, he was their guy, and they were going to continue to support him, and all these guys were still on his side going forward. Now there's another group I'm going to add to this pile right now because we're ready to add the final section to this chart. I'm going to just, it's getting the wrong color. No, I guess that's the right one. No. I want to make sure it doesn't just look weird. All right, there we go. And so at this point, I'm going to bring up one last group, which you probably haven't heard of before. The Communion, right, of Reformed Evangelical, love these long names, churches. All right, this is again a group that is basically part of this ideology thinking, but they're extremely important in this where we are right now. This is a group which was founded by Doug Wilson. And he's not a prophet, he's just a preacher. He had his own church, non-denominational church, and he started to develop this thing, this Communion of Reformed Evangelical Churches, CREC is for short. And this was an extremely aggressive group, Christian nationalist all the way, hardcore. We will take over America. We will destroy everybody who's in our way. They began to focus on education. They started to set up colleges. They started to create a homeschool network. Their curricula is everywhere in America right now. And so this is really the homeschooling, higher education, teaching thing to get an entire new generation on board with the Christian nationalist agenda. And so that's where their role becomes extremely important in this. Doug Wilson has said specifically that we will have to enforce Sunday laws to make America prosperous in God's eyes. And so what about the people who will be imprisoned? Well, that's too bad. It's just the way it is. We have to deal with it because these are people that we have to conform to the society for the greater good. And so this is a very important part of what you've never heard of right now in American society. Now, these guys, amazingly, now this is a Protestant group, believe in infant baptism. That's a significant thing for a Protestant group to believe in, because that's a Catholic teaching. And Protestantism has said, no, we're not going to do infant baptism. This is going back to Catholicism. So they're like this close to Catholicism on certain areas. Infant baptism. And they also, in fact, I'm going to put this, just put up some of their ideas here. Infant baptism and total war. This involves not only spiritual warfare, but physical warfare. This is a we will destroy our enemies warfare. Not just ideology, but physically, we are going to destroy them. And they are also, like I said, the homeschooling superpower right now. Also, a very interesting thing, part of their group. They are very much anti-women. Women are very much second-class citizens in this organization. They cannot hold any office. They can't have any positions of power. They, in a household, are told that whatever the man votes for the household, that's what you vote. You don't vote against the man under any circumstances, if you vote at all. It's a very old school Puritanism, anti-women's equality type of thing. They're very much, women have to have permission to speak in public. It's very aggressive in their stand on that. So that's kind of an interesting thing with that. So this is a group that is kind of becoming an infiltrator right now. They're doing a lot of work that you don't see. They're not out there electing candidates and doing stuff like that. They're out there converting minds of how to become Christian nationalists. And their most prominent person that you will have heard of in this regard, and I'm going to put him in the political category color, is, I'm losing this color. Our beloved Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth. He is part of this group. He's a converted member of these churches, and he is extremely devout in this and pushing these agendas. And so he's been succeeding in many ways in changing the curriculum of everything military, so all of our military schools and whatever, into a Christian nationalist agenda schooling. So he's actually changing the curriculum of all these different things. Anything involving the military teaching process through the Pentagon, he's changing into this Christian nationalist agenda. That's one of his kind of behind-the-scenes things nobody is seeing, but very much part of what he's doing. This is so new that it was just sent to me within the last few days. So I'm going to look it up here. This was from Associated Press. Pete Hegseth had a prayer Christian worship service at the Pentagon, and this was just like 3 weeks ago. And this was his prayer. He was praying about the war that we're currently experiencing. Let every round, every bullet, every missile, let every round find its mark against the enemies of righteousness and our great nation. Give them wisdom in every decision, endurance for the trial ahead, unbreakable unity, and overwhelming violence of action against those who deserve no mercy. Doesn't that sound like speaking as a dragon? My goodness, it's like there's no mercy for your enemy under any circumstances, enemies of righteousness. That's the rhetoric that we are going to be facing once things really finally break apart, and we're going to be dealing with that type of language as anybody who is against the status quo of what we're dealing with. So anyway, so that's kind of those key things right there in that group. And so this group right now is in key positions of power. Obviously, he's there. Paula White is in the White House doing stuff as part of a religious group. These guys are, always working for and with the current administration. Dutch Sheets is interesting because he was the one who wrote the Watchman Decree. And I have a whole video on that on our YouTube channel. If you have not seen it, you need to go see it, because the Watchman Decree is one of the most aggressively anti-religious freedom documents ever written. It is bold, it is unapologetic, it says what they believe. They say specifically that we will destroy our enemies have no mercy, all this sort of thing. We will take over every facet of society. It's called the Seven Mountains Mandate, which is part of this entire thing. And it was started in the 70s, given form in the 2000s by Peter Wagner and others, and it became known as the Seven Mountains Mandate. We're going to take over politics and society and entertainment and all the different things. They list all seven, which is basically all society broken into 7 groups. And so he wrote this Watchman Decree, and they went around the country and they got full stadiums which were chanting this demand of heaven to give them what they want. And so I have a video of that on ours, which is The Dragon Speaks, on our YouTube channel, Dennis Priebe Ministries. And so if you want to see that itself, exactly what it says, take a look at that. So this is an extremely active group working to achieve Christian nationalism. Now, I'm going to add one last thing for this, and then we're going to be done. I'm not going to keep you here much longer, but there's one more group that has to be mentioned in this context. And this is the really fascinating one because they jumped ship. The Heritage Foundation. This was a group that was founded in the 1970s and 80s. It was founded by these boys over here when they were working on getting it together. It became a think tank to promote a religious right agenda in national politics. And it worked for years on getting these things accomplished to get to where they need to go. And so it was extremely influential in the 90s and early 2000s for this group to push their ideology and their agendas in a way that would accomplish goals in the government. And then the most amazing thing happened. All of a sudden, the leadership of this group no longer was made up of this group, it got made up of this group. They switched sides. They went from the Evangelical Party to the New Apostolic Reformation Party, and they became the promoters of this side. And it's a fascinating way that took place through that time period, because all of a sudden they were promoting all the rhetoric of this rather than the rhetoric of that. And it hadn't changed a lot, but it just became more aggressive and became more strident. And so they put out a document that was called Project 2025, and that was the agenda for the next conservative religious president, which at the time hadn't been decided yet, but ended up being Donald Trump again in 2025. And that was basically a 900-plus page document about every way you need to take over the government to become a Christian nation. And once all of that's done, then Jesus will come and we can go home. And that's the agenda of this group. And so if we can make America Christian all the way, then at that point we will achieve the goals we're looking for, and Jesus will finally say, I can finally come, you finally got your act together, and we move forward. Now, the Heritage Foundation put out the very famous Project 2025, but then just in the last 6 months, they put out another document on pro-family and the need to have strong families. And in the middle of that document was hardcore pro-Sunday laws. It was, we need a national Sunday law. All those places which still have blue laws are great. They're reservoirs. We have to keep them going and expand upon them. We need a national Sunday law in America to save America's soul. Basically, a very blatantly pro-Sunday law. This is the first legitimate pro-national Sunday law attempt since the 1890s Blair Bills. We have not done anything in that time period, anything close to it. There have been scattered voices which had no traction and no ability to get anywhere. This is a major voice which is pushing an agenda which this group is all on board with to start a movement that will eventually go to Sunday law legislation. This is a key moment for this because this is a complete, outright capitulation to the destruction of church and state separation and a promotion of a one nation law that will promote all these sorts of things. And so there's your chart. That is kind of the history of where we are to this point right now. And like I said, I'm not making predictions. I'm not predicting where this will go. This could all fizzle out just like this fizzled out if God's people continue to wander in the wilderness. This is not going to make anything happen because no matter what this group wants, no matter what these leaders want, if they tried to pass a Sunday law tomorrow, America would say, forget it. We're not going to accept that. America is not going to go to church on Sunday morning because you have to. I mean, that's not going to happen. We're free America. We can do whatever we want. We're watching football on Sunday. We're not going to go to a church just because you idiots in Washington say so. This is not going to accomplish a national Sunday law agenda in and of itself. And that's why I focus again, not on bad guys. Oh, look what they're doing. Oh, look how terrible they are. Because this will only achieve something when God's people over here say yes. Then this can actually kick in and get the traction, and we will have final events very rapidly. The final events will be rapid ones. And so God's people are the determining factor of this, not the bad guys on a picture screen like this, but God's people will determine whether this moves forward or whether this dies like the Blair Bills and the National Reform Association of 150 years ago. And so this is, again, not to get us angry and upset with the bad people who are running things, but to be aware of where we are, where we have gotten to in this point, and why things are happening the way they are. Many of the actions you see taking place by current leadership and various things like that are built on this new apostolic reformation policy. They are within all levels of government in key positions, and their agenda is the agenda of our current administration. And so whether they will accomplish anything or not is not up to them. Despite what they would like it to be, they want to force it down on everybody, but that's not up to them. That's up to God allowing the winds to blow when he sees God's people are ready. So that's my overview. That's my look at that. Something I found recently that was very interesting was Christian Nationalism, a return to Christendom. This is by our Church State Council out in the Pacific Union. And it actually completely condemns Christian nationalism and shows how Ellen White understood this 150 years ago and how our leaders in America had nothing to do with this Christian nationalist movement. It's a very good, well-written, put-together thing to kind of wake people up to the fact that we as Adventists are not in support of this at all. Christian liberty is about everybody's freedom to worship as they like, not an agenda that leads to forced worship. And so I was actually very impressed with the job that they'd put out on addressing that forthright. And so, like I said, this is about yesterday. This is about today. This is not about tomorrow. What happens tomorrow, we will see. But that's my presentation. I don't know if you have any questions before we finish it out, but I'm open up to anything you want to say before we close. No questions? We're fine with that too.
I guess you could find, these kind of things out there on the internet, the speeches they make, the policies they make.
Yep.
Yeah, there's boatloads of them.
Oh, yeah. And this is, it used to be, this group was considered the religious fanatics of their time, amongst the secular world. It's like, oh, these religious guys, and they're pushing all their agendas and whatever. And they became kind of mainstream after a while. They kind of settled into accepted, well, the Republicans are with the moral majority, the religious right, that's just the way it is. It just became kind of an accepted thing. This group became the fringe, weird, oh, look at those weird Christian nationalists, what are they up to? And so it's like, these became the normal people, and these became the weird people when these were originally the weird people. So, our tastes have been deadened as time has gone on, where the more extreme version of this has kind of taken the place of the original version. And now these are becoming more mainstream, and these are becoming more acceptable. And now you get speakers, and I'm gonna put him up on the list, even though he's no longer part of this at this point. But yeah, he should be on this list as well. He's not a political; he's religious. There we go. Charlie Kirk. He is definitely in this camp. And ideology-wise, he's totally with this group rather than this group. And he, in many ways, is the most significant political actor in getting a young people movement in favor of the MAGA movement. And so, he has a lot of responsibility involved in getting this whole thing into the position it is now. That was one thing I was going to mention. Yeah, so he is a perfect example how this group is all pro-Israel all the time, and this group is neutral or not. He was a perfect example of that. He was neutral, and then he became very anti-Israel during the war in Gaza, where he was very much condemning them for the atrocities and things like that. And he got a lot of people in this group angry with him because of his anti-Israel statements. And but that was a representative of as well of this new version of the neutrality for Israel, and sometimes antagonism to Israel because of its successes and things like that. One of the other things I forgot to mention on this that I will set up here as a separate thing as well. This is totally the secret rapture group. God is going to come, and he is going to take away all the good guys, and he's going to leave behind all the bad guys, and they're going to have to suffer through the tribulation, and it's going to be a mess, but we're going to be out of here. We're going to be taken in rapture. It's going to be awesome. That is this group. This group doesn't care about the secret rapture. They do not promote secret rapture. They are going to live through it, and they're going to be ready. And so this group are the preppers. They're getting ready. They're getting their ammunition ready. They're getting their food supplies ready. They're living in their bunkers in their backyard. And they are going to survive the time of trouble that's coming. And they're going to emerge out the other side and going to be in control. They're going to live through this and be underneath Jesus' reign on earth. And so that is another key difference of this group as well from that. This group is like, we're out of here. This group is, we're going to bunker down and we're going to take over. Yep.
So regarding Charlie Kirk,
Yep.
who's the Sabbath keeper,
Yep. Yes. Yes.
do you think Satan specifically picked him for this role to help infiltrate his church?
It's very possible. You know, I mean, I'm never going to assign a moral judgment on anybody. He might be sincere in all of what he believed. I'm not going to say he wasn't sincere in what he believed, but he was deluded, you know, because of all of these different things that he's a part of. You know, it is a false version of Christianity. It is definitely not a true version. And so, you know, he's promoting various things. And I mean, there's elements of racism in some of his comments and things like that he said, casual racism. It wasn't, you know, blatant racism, but there was some casual racism in his comments. And, you know, he's very much a, you know, family, you know, type of guy, but he's also very political and all that kind of stuff. And what is interesting with Charlie Kirk is he was worshiping on Sunday, and then according to the the information, he's switching over to worship on both days. So he's still worshiping on Sunday, but he's also keeping Sabbath in one form or another. And he's starting to believe it's important, according to what we've been told about what he believed. Some of this is coming from people which I don't really trust, so I'm not so sure about how much that is true or not. But, you know, as far as it goes, you know, the statements he made before he died, it was sounding like he was doing both. Now, it's a pretty weak form of Sabbath observance to do both. It's like, I'm keeping Sunday and Sabbath, just to be sure, you know, belt and suspenders. And so it's like, would he have eventually shifted over to a Sabbath worship? That would have involved a lot of hardship on his part, because this group wants no part of that. And so if he had gone all the way to a seventh-day Sabbath-keeping existence, this group says, not in our watch, not on our watch. You're out of the group. You're out of the club. This group is not going to switch over to Sabbath-keeping just because Charlie Kirk says so. And so, you know, the question is, if he had lived, would he have changed to a full Sabbath worship? And if he had changed, would he have been thrown out and become, you know, a true voice for, you know, for truth? Or would he have capitulated to a, you know, I guess I can't do that type of thing? We have no idea. And so I'm not going to say he's a bad person or a good person, because I know nothing about his inner soul of what his thinking was. And whether or not he was keeping Sabbath in a tentative way, kind of keeping it quiet, while at the same time, you know, keeping Sunday, I'm going to do both. I'm not too excited about that as a stand for truth type of thing. It's like, okay, he's making progress maybe. I don't know. So it's like, at that point, you know, he's an interesting character that plays a very important role, but his death plays an even bigger role. Because by dying horribly, like he did, murdered in plain sight on television, basically on the internet, he becomes a lightning rod for everything in this movement and everything that this movement stands for. We're driving through Arizona. We're driving through Arizona on Tuesday. Giant billboard with Charlie Kirk's picture on it, giving his date of birth and death. That's it. That's all that's on the billboard. It's just a picture of Charlie Kirk. Keeping it in mind, keeping you to remember, this guy is a martyr for the cause. He died so that we can achieve what we want to achieve. And so his death is in many ways more important to this movement than his life, because he becomes we will destroy our enemies because they're evil, they're assassins, we must destroy them before they destroy us. And that's where you get into this Doug Wilson ideology of we will destroy our enemies physically, because they are very much, you know, this is total war. This is not just a ideology, I'm going to win you over by teaching better truth than you. This is, I'm going to win you over by throwing you in jail and eventually killing you. You know, this is a very aggressive form of Christianity, which is false Christianity, but it's very much, you know, we will destroy the enemies of truth, even if it means using guns and bullets and everything else. And so Charlie Kirk becomes the martyr for that cause now that he's dead. And so that, you know, in many ways is more important than anything else that he did during life.
lot of Adventist pastors that
Mhm.
were talking about him.
Yeah.
I think he was even interviewed by one or two
Yeah.
before his death, and then afterwards,
Yep.
he spoke and people were talking about
Yep.
it.
Yep.
Our ours even did a sermon about it.
Okay.
From our standpoint.
Yeah.
But he like all of a sudden became like adopted Adventist.
Yes. Yes. And because of his quasi-Sabbath keeping, and because of that, all of a sudden he's the greatest hero ever. He's leading the way toward Adventism. Yes, exactly, exactly. And you see, this is what this whole chart is. The whole point of this entire sermon is my goal is to say this: politics is corrupt. Every bit of politics is corrupt. And as soon as these guys decided that we're going to achieve greatness through politics, and that led to this, it became completely out of bounds for anything Adventism should be involved in. On either side, I'm not saying we should go vote Democrat. I'm not saying anything like that. We should be anti-politic in the sense of we do not get involved with party politics and crass politics, because all of this is about making compromises and making deals and compromising your beliefs to get where you need to go and then achieve power and then hit somebody with a hammer. All of these type of things are not real Christianity. And so when we as Adventists support any part of this, we are supporting a form of Christian nationalism. And the Liberty editor wrote in one of her editorials, there is a real danger to Adventism to be a casual Christian nationalist. We support the reform of society. We support the reform of institutions for godly purpose. We want Christianity in our schools and in our society. And so when these guys are talking those type of things, we go, yeah, that's good. I like that. That's a good idea. I wish that would happen, you know? And so it's kind of like a backdoor casual support of really toxic things that we support because we want some kind of a faith understanding in America that is really good to help us make better decisions. And so it's like we don't want to be part of those evil secular atheist people. They're the bad guys. We know that. So I guess we better support these guys. And so we become a kind of a casual Christian nationalist in that setting. And that's a real danger. And that's why I kind of have this as a presentation. It's like, don't get involved even peripherally. This is not the way to a better America. This is a way to a Sunday law America. And we're working toward that. They're working toward that goal blatantly, openly, Sunday law America. They want it. And so, you know, any part of this you support, you end up supporting that agenda, even indirectly. And that's why I've never voted for a president. I've never voted for anybody because I don't trust people. And I won't support the enemy of these guys any more than I will support them. And I just wash my hands of the whole thing and I just watch very carefully. I pay attention, but I don't get involved because to be involved is to stain your hands with what has happened with these groups. And these are hands that are very much in the muck of everything. Yes?
Those folks don't really care about Israel.
Yep.
The old guard does.
Yep.
Is the war with Iran on behalf of Israel somehow a capitulation or are they trying to?
That's a very good question, actually. It's not a strange question because you're exactly right. This group, if it had happened 20 years ago, I would have said 100% it is the agenda of the pro-Israel faction. And so the fact that this group is not pro-Israel in that, why is this happening now? Because, I mean, obviously he has strong ties with Netanyahu. I mean, they are, you know, very much allied on many things. And so there is a connection there. But why is he actually pushing the war when a lot of them don't support it? Now, this is where you actually find this in action. Notice how this war is not being supported by many, many, many people in the MAGA movement. This is a very unpopular war, even amongst his base. And so he's actually going against these people here in the MAGA movement by doing something that this group over here is in favor of. So it is actually a strange choice on his part. And so I actually am curious myself why this war is actually being promoted, because his advisors are more from this group than from this group, and yet he still decided to go to war against the enemy of Israel in this sort of thing. So if you have any insight on that, I do not.
But they all agree that they want to attack Islam.
Yes, yes. Okay, so now that is 100% true. They both share the anti-Islam agenda. That is true. So Iran is always the enemy. Iraq is always the enemy, no matter what. And it's interesting. Saudi Arabia is not the enemy because they're rich and powerful, and we're friends with them. But but for the the real the hardcore the Shiite type Muslims and the those types of ones which are the hardcore religious ones, yes, they're always the enemy to all of these groups whatsoever. So that does play into this for sure. But you notice, but it is a key thing right now that this war is not universally supported by his base. He's got a lot of people like I can't remember the name right now. Tucker Carlson, yeah, extremely upset with this administration's war right now. Very, very much, condemning every part of what he's doing right now. And he has a lot of influence in the MAGA movement. So there is a huge faction of this which didn't want to go to war with anybody. And he's breaking that promise and going on with these wars and whatever. So yes, that is a interesting choice on his part to choose this war at this time. I'll leave it at that because I don't know behind the scenes what's going on, and again, we'll not speculate conspiracy theories onto why people do things they do. Yes, they do. They're in favor of this. This group loves this, and Pete Hegseth is all on board with that. So again, this is not all one group. This is fractionalized into certain issues, and that's what honestly keeps all of this group from taking over America. If they all united completely on every issue, they would have a much better chance of doing things. But there are differences in these groups that do keep them a little bit different and different focus on things like that and keep them from uniting completely. These guys require a unlooked for calamity to really unify. The sudden unlooked for calamity of Christ object lessons that Ellen White says in the last time period, which will be the defining moment moving everything forward to death in a society. The sudden unlooked for calamity, which we don't know and which I will not speculate on in any form, will change all of this into a happy group working 100% in lockstep on every issue. That hasn't happened yet. And I haven't even brought up the Catholics here. I mean, I haven't even looked at the Catholic Church involvement. The Catholic Church has been involved with it from this point on as advisors, as partners, as various different allies in various things. The papacy is totally opposed to certain positions of this group, and so there's factionalization there as well that keeps them from being all unified. And so again, there's a papacy separate agenda here as well. And the papacy, and this is what my Misdirection and Guile sermon talks about, which if you want to see that, that's on YouTube as well. My Misdirection and Guile focuses on the fact that Catholicism, papacy, Vatican, has its focus on the world except America. They're working in all these different countries. They're working in the East. They're working in the Middle East. They're working in the Far East in some of these Buddhist and New Age type religions. They're working in South America and Africa and Europe. They're working to get the papacy so popular and so beloved and so accepted in these various places that they will be, willing partners going forward. They're getting the atheist crowd involved by their 2015 encyclical on the environment and by saying stuff like Gaia, Mother Earth. They're getting the New Age crowd. That's in the encyclical. And so they're like making inroads to all these different groups. But they're leaving America alone. Why? Because America's covered, thank you. They got it taken care of. And so America is the second beast power. The second beast power, like I show in my sermon, is actually the catalyst to the end time events. Because it happens first in America, it happens with the second beast power. This is the second beast power. Catholicism can sit over in Rome and go, just do what you're doing, we're waiting, and as soon as you're done over there, we will be happy to take over. They're not needing to take over America because this group's doing it for them. They're busy everywhere else. But the Vatican is not so much concerned with America right now because these groups are doing it for them. Once the second beast power kicks in, everything starts to really happen. And then the first beast takes over and assumes the throne for however long it lasts. Probably not long, but it will be a one unified group at that point with the Catholicism at its head. But this group is doing the job that the papacy wants here in America. So that's why I don't talk about that in this sermon. because this is not about the papacy. The papacy is just over there like, yeah, keep doing what you're doing. It's good. Progress is being made. Let's go. Yes.
American Pope,
Yes.
States,
Yes.
Catholic Church doing things in different places. You've got China, Russia, all that kind of stuff going on.
That's right.
It's like puzzle pieces, but they haven't yet come together.
That's right. Exactly. And they won't come together. They will still be the toes of the statue, unable to mix together. The iron and clay will not mix until the very last moment when God's people are ready. God's people are finally able to have this fulfill its destiny. And at that point, everything happens and we're done. So these groups will never put all those puzzle pieces together, even though they're trying really hard.
Matthew, none of this will happen until God sees He has it ready.
None of it.
People ready.
None of it. None of this will happen. And that's why, again, don't spend the next 3 weeks of your life researching every last person on this list and figuring out how they've controlled this from that and the other. You know, this is not a Walter Veith conspiracy theory chart to go out and focus on. This is all factual stuff we can look at in history, but it's not about making that your priority. This is just knowing where we are right now. This is useful information, but it should not be the exclusive focus of any of our time. Our focus needs to be on getting sin out of our lives. That's our focus. You know, 100% of effort to let God work in our lives, and 5% of our effort to know what's going on. I mean, that's really what we should be focusing on is God's wanting to clean sin out of our lives. He's waiting to clean sin out of our lives. All we have to do is say yes to God's power, yes to His way, and then He will do immediately what He's been asking to do forever. And when 144,000, however many that is, literal or symbolic, when that happens, then all this actually matters and kicks in and we're done. Very quickly. That's right. Very quickly. And the unlooked for calamity could come tomorrow, or it could come next month, or next year, or it could come in 500 years from now, based on God's people, not on what these guys are doing. So.
And the book, The Great Controversy, lays all this.
Yes.
Out the future.
Yes.
Out the future.
Exactly. That's right. And that's why my misdirection and guile sermon is important, because there is so much information that basically, without using names, without ever saying the New Apostolic Reformation, says everything on this chart will happen. And that's where we are ignoring a lot of what she has to say in order to say it's going to be Davros, it's going to be the elite, it's going to be secular humanism, it's going to be communism, it's going to be all these different things which are totally not on this chart because nothing in prophecy predicts those things to be happening. None of those things are what prophecy tells us will be the catalysts. It will never be an anti-God movement. It will never be an atheist movement. Ellen White is crystal clear. It will be a religious movement of evangelical Protestant religions. She uses those words. And so this is what she describes. She does not describe a secular, new United Nations-run government destroying all of our freedoms. That is a red herring being promoted right now by many, many people in Adventism. All your talk about United Nations, all your talk about the elite, all your talk about who's meeting at Davros, all your talk about the atheists are a misdirection, because that is not what prophecy says will happen. Are they evil? Absolutely they're evil. Are they run by Satan? Absolutely they're run by Satan. They are not the version of Satanism that will succeed. This is the version of Satanism that will succeed. We know that not because these are more Satan-run than the other groups, but because God told us through His prophet that it would be these types of groups that would make it happen. And that, for me, is why we have to focus on this rather than on all of the atheistic groups. Not because the atheists are our friends, but because they are the ones that are shown as irrelevant in the end-time events. Atheism is going to disappear like that as soon as supernatural kicks in. As soon as we have miracles taking place that can't be refuted, atheism is going to dissolve. And so atheism is not the threat that we are being told it is in our society, in our Adventist society. So that's why I like to re-emphasize this, because this doesn't get the attention it should.
When you get your presentation together,
Well, that's what I'm working on. I'm going to be on this trip turning this into a PowerPoint that I can use as a new presentation. This is only like 2 months old that I've had this in my head, And so I'll have a little tiny list of names. That's the entire list. This is my entire sermon right here. So, all right, so that's good. We're already way past our time when we were going to quit. So if you want to eat quickly, we can do that and get started. I don't want to keep you after sundown, and I do want to do my last nature presentations. So I'm just going to do a quick prayer to close, and we do our final supper here. Father in heaven, we've looked at some very serious issues. We've looked at some of the things that have happened in our history and our present time, and we look to you for the future of what will happen next. And we ask that you come into our lives so that we can be the ones who are fulfilling your destiny, the ones who you have asked for to come into this last generation movement and hasten your coming by actually saying yes to what you've asked, not by any power of our own, but through our acceptance of your power. And as we go to our supper, bless the food and help us to have good fellowship as we finish out this Sabbath day together and look to see what will happen next in the world we live in. In Jesus' name.